Hey guys, it's Connor, and welcome back to another Soapbox Gaming episode today. We're not going to do any intros today. I'm not going to ask how you doing, where you been, any of that, because today is finally the day that I get to talk about my most anticipated movie over the past few years, The Batman. Or more specifically, Matt Reeves The Batman. Okay? So I saw this film the other day, this past Tuesday, at the IMAX fan screening event on March 1st. As of recording, I will be seeing it a second time on March 5th, this upcoming Saturday, right? And I've basically been sitting at home thinking about this film nonstop since seeing it. Like, literally, I wake up in the morning and I'm thinking of scenes from this movie. Literally, when I lay my head down at night to go to sleep, I am thinking about scenes from this movie. And since it's been a couple of days and I've had enough time to really breathe and think my thoughts over about the film, I'm finally ready to give my impressions and my overall review of the movie. Now, with that said, I think there are two things that I need to say up front before this review even gets started, before we get into the meat and potatoes, right? Number one, this is my review, okay? Reviews in general are subjective, right? It's my perspective. This is my opinion, and that is okay, right? Also to note, this is the opinion of a hardcore DC Comics guy, as well as a hardcore Bat freak, right? For those new to my channel, Batman is my favorite fictional character ever, point blank period. There is no one above, there is no one below him. And I made a video a few weeks back basically theorizing what this first movie was going to be, which also gives you a little bit more in grand detail about what Batman means to me personally throughout my entire life, and even up to right now being a 27-year-old adult, right? My knowledge of him, his mythos, his rogues is very extensive, so it's safe to say that my love for the character runs extremely deep. But also, that means that I am very critical of any Batman media that presents itself to the world, meaning any of the comics, any of the video games, any of the animated movies or TV shows, right? And of course, what we're here to talk about today, any live adaptations of him. So take that how you will. I know people get really weird when it comes to reviews, regardless of if they're extremely positive or negative. So in that sense, you have been warned. Please spare me any of your weirdo comments down below. Now, for number two, as far as spoilers go, I have decided that in order to do this review any justice, I have to go into full spoiler territory, right? I have to be able to talk about certain scenes. I have to be able to talk about certain story beats in order for you to really understand my feelings and emotions when watching this movie. I apologize for anyone looking for a non-spoiler review, but by the time this video releases, which should be Monday, March 7th, enough people should have been able to see this film at this point to talk about spoilers, right? I mean, this movie, man, everyone is going to try and rush out and see it this weekend because it has been in the making for 5 years with so much hype, so much speculation, anticipation, that I feel as if limiting myself and what I'm able to talk about will only handicap this review in some key ways. And self-admittedly, I'm so excited to really talk about this movie, and I want to be a little bit selfish here, and I want to talk my heart out and really analyze what Reeves has done and what he is going for with his interpretation, right? I don't know how long this video is going to be. I don't know how many sections this video is going to be. I'm not going to limit myself today. I'm going to talk until I feel I have talked enough. So without further ado, it is finally time to talk about Matt Reeves The Batman. Okay, so I want to open up this review with a big, bold, salacious headline before we really discuss the positives and negatives of this film, because yes, there are some nitpicks that I have with some of the story beats. But in terms of how this review will go, I will talk about the plot in broad strokes, right? I will tell you about the beginning, middle, and end. I really won't get into like the intricate nitty-gritty of each and every scene, but I really want to focus mainly on the character portrayals and arcs that happen throughout this film, along with the overall world building Reeves is creating with this first entry for this self-proclaimed Batverse, right? Now, let me preference this for people a bit on the fence about this movie. I think a lot of people are going to find this film divisive. I think a lot of people are not going to think this film is perfect, right? And honestly, this might be the most off-putting Batman movie to date for some. We'll kind of get a little bit more into that when I have some of the negatives to speak about. But right now, at least for me, this film is like chef's kiss perfection. And after the credits rolled and those dim, warm lights came back on in the theater, and my girlfriend, who was sitting directly left of me, almost immediately asked me, what did I think about this movie? And I couldn't respond to her immediately. I needed to tell her, like, you need to give me a second to process. Because for the past 2 hours and 47 minutes, I sat in that IMAX seat in shock and awe with the biggest, dumbest grin on my face. And as we were walking back towards the car, I was starting to articulate what my gut was telling me. And she was just going on about how much she enjoyed it, how she didn't think she was going to enjoy it because she's never really been into Batman, and that she really wanted to know what I thought since I've been foaming at the mouth for this movie for a very long time at this point. And as I sat down, got adjusted into the passenger seat, I told her what my feelings were. And that feeling being that this film is the closest thing we will ever get to a live-action, modernized interpretation of Batman, the animated series, which I know, some of you heard that and, think what I just said is crazy, it's blasphemous, it's sacrilegious, because if you're a hardcore Bat freak, just the hardcore DC guy in general, you know that the animated series is still almost unanimously considered the best interpretation of Batman in any kind of media, and has remained untouched since its creation in the 1990s, right? There have been multiple live-action Batman films since then. There have been multiple Batman animated films. There have been multiple other Batman animated series since the show released, and none of them have ever really been able to create the same emotional highs and lows that series narrative was able to expertly do, at least until now, or at least in my opinion. And a lot of that has to do with how wonderfully crafted Reeves' new interpretation is. I mean, this is true masterclass filmmaking happening in the Batman, right? From the casting, the costumes, the set design, the action set pieces, the beautiful score, the wonderful performances, and the glue of it all, right? The star of the show, at least in my opinion, this intricate, interwoven script. Everything in this film serves a purpose in one way or another. Everything is interconnected and really plays out beautifully from scene to scene. Speaking of the script, let's just jump right into it, all right? The overall plot of this movie is something new to the live-action Batman landscape, which I think is great. It's very refreshing. It's very satisfying for the most part. And I think the majority of the casual audience will really like it and think that it's something new. I mean, especially in a genre like comic book movies where, for the most part, they feel very samey. This does feel very different. However, if you are a hardcore fan like myself, right? If you keep up with a lot of the current comics, overall Batman mythos and canon, I do think the narrative can feel quite familiar in some spots, which to me isn't necessarily a bad thing, because while yes, this movie has been marketed as a detective story, right? At first glance, it does appear that way, but once you really get into this film and you really get down to the nitty-gritty, especially with how many scenes of Bruce are in this movie, this is intended to be a character drama / study about Bruce Wayne, which is great, right? I really love that. Big animated series vibes there, which we'll get into in a bit, but that never happens in live action Batman movies, really, right? Because frankly, most directors don't seem to understand or really care about Bruce and his story, aside from the part where he puts on a costume and runs around and beats up criminals, right? They all do the same thing, in my opinion, where they fast forward to the part where Bruce's character becomes a full-fledged superhero, basically in his prime after one movie, without really addressing the pain, sorrow, and mistakes that it took for him to get there. Reeves' version, though, man, is probably the most accurate portrayal of any comic book character in the comic book movie landscape, right? And Reeves definitely uses a lot of different comic book arcs as his Bruce's foundation, right? Arguably, I think the biggest main theme for this first film to me is once you grasp that this is a Bruce Wayne point of view film and a character study, you really see that a lot of the narrative is about his mind and psychology, that of a very broken, unhinged, obsessed, rage-fueled Bruce Wayne who has never wanted to move on from the death of his parents, right? Reeves really wants to transport you into the mind of Batman and understand why Bruce, at least at this point in time in his life, cannot be anybody but Batman, right? It's clear from the start, this is a Bruce who hasn't realized and come to terms with needing to be a public figure in Gotham just yet, right? I'd say 90% of this movie, Bruce is on screen front and center with literally every kind of plot beat revolving around him, and he's mainly in the bat suit the entire time, right? Like, I would probably say, I don't know, of his scenes, maybe 20% of them, he's Bruce Wayne. The rest, he is in costume the entire time, right? And to me, just to sort of make connections to a certain comic arc, this is where Batman Ego, written by the late, great Darwin Cook, very much plays a prominent role in this regard, in sort of the beginnings and emotional bearings of Reeves's Bruce Wayne. Just like in Ego, Bruce's arc in this film starts from a place of trauma, obsession, and darkness, but also ends with him having an honest realization about his actions over the past 2 years of being the Batman and sort of questioning, what is the Batman? What do I want the Batman to be, right? In the film, they sort of explain it that his whole goal as the Batman for the past 2 years was to have an effect on the city, instilling fear into Gotham's criminal element, and ultimately / supposedly trying to make it a safer place for the citizens. But, which can really be boiled down to the scene in the film between Bruce and Alfred, where Bruce explains really the motivations for his mission, his crusade, right? Which is never wanting anyone else in the city to have to go through what he had to go through, along with him never losing anyone he cares for again. Like I said, that's his mission, that is his crusade, despite it being this never-ending battle with no end in sight. But the way Reeves writes his Bruce is very similar to the way that the animated series and the comics do, where this Bruce Wayne, while being very much at his lowest, I would argue, like emotionally, he still truly believes that he can sort of win this battle and win this war. But in reality, what the presence of Batman has done in Gotham has affected the city in a way that he did not predict, right? The legend and myth of the Batman in this world has essentially become a lighthouse beacon on Gotham's stormy shores, drawing in and inspiring all the new and old freaks and psychos hidden away. By the end of the Batman's experience with the Riddler in this movie, he sort of now knows he can't keep approaching his mission the same way that he has for the past 2 years, right? He needs to be more than just a vigilante, fulfilling his own selfish and partially idealistic desires. He needs the Batman to become something that the people of Gotham can see as a symbol of hope, instead of being a byproduct of a place that continues to get more stranger and more dangerous with each passing year. And I think that is so beautiful, because this really is the most accurate version of the character, I think, ever, and probably we will ever see, because that is quintessential Batman, right? That entire character arc that he goes through throughout this first movie is quintessential. It's textbook Batman. A lot of the sort of popular and modern origin arcs for him always, lead to that conclusion that, like, I can be this rage-fueled monster all I want, but it's not going to have the effect that I need in order to save this city. And so he needs to become bigger and better and brighter in some cases in order to be the symbol of hope instead of Gotham's boogeyman. And I really love that, once again, you can just tell how finely crafted and intended this sort of epiphany moment for Bruce is supposed to be, right? Reeves is really trying to set up this character arc for a supposed, the rumors are for a supposed trilogy. And theoretically, by the third film, he will be that symbol of hope and sort of the Batman we all know in his prime, the full-fledged superhero. And I really like that he's taking that approach instead of the sort of, not to knock on MCU movies or even some of the older superhero movies, but he doesn't want to rush to make Bruce a superhero. He wants it to feel earned. He wants it to feel like you, the viewer, have been on this journey with him and you are, like, proud of him in this moment, right? And I just love that. All right, now I want to transition into speaking about the Riddler and his evil plan throughout this entire movie, right? Which is to expose the corruptness and injustices that have been happening right in the very soul of the city for decades, right? Since he was a little boy in the Wayne orphanage, from its institutions to politicians to even the founding families of Gotham. No one is safe until Riddler gets his vengeance, nod, wink, wink. I'll talk a little bit about that later, for all of the years of pain and torment that he has suffered, right? And he kicks that off with the opening scene, which really sets the tone for the rest of the film, right? Riddler's first appearance in this movie is almost like a horror movie character. He kind of blends right into the background while the mayor's watching TV until the camera wants you to see him. It's a pretty disturbing first kill for the most part, right? Riddler bashes in the mayor's head with this carpenter tool, ties up his head with duct tape, cuts off his thumb, and then from there, that's when Batman arrives to the crime scene with Jim, which kicks off the cat and mouse aspect of this game, which will go all the way up until the very last act of this film, right? Riddler's plot is where the majority of Batman's detective skills are showcased and come into play, which is amazing. It's finally such a joy to see Batman actually be on a crime scene and be the smartest jackass in the room, right? There's the scene where he's like, well, how, you see that the mayor's thumb gets cut off, and he's like, well, where's his thumb? And he's like, well, you can tell that, his thumb was cut off while he was alive because of, like, the ligature marks, right? He's doing that type of stuff. It's great. It was phenomenal. That's very, very extremely accurate to the comics, right? And I also love that this scene has a very, very uncomfortable sense of tension, especially when Batman starts walking in down the hall and all of these cops are just staring at him with disgust, right? They're looking at him like a lunatic, like a psychopath. They can't believe that Jim brought him here, right? And I really love that because, once again, especially in Batman's early years, that is very accurate, right? And I think the detective work in this film is actually pretty good for the most part. It's really well written. Everything really makes sense leading on to the next riddle. The riddles themselves are pretty fairly simple, right? But that sort of serves the purpose of making sure that the general audience can keep up with what's going on. Now, as far as the reveals and twists go, right, there's a couple that are going on, right? The first main one is sort of the Carmine Falcone aspect of this movie, right? Carmine Falcone, for those who don't know, is essentially the last big mob boss in Gotham City, right? He's kind of the last one. And in being kind of the last one, he is the one that essentially runs the city, which is confirmed in a certain scene in this movie where one of Falcone's employees is basically explaining, no, like, he owns everything. He owns the cops, he owns the judges, he owns the politicians, he owns any institution that he wants, right? And the second being, Carmine Falcone is actually an informant and was the one that sort of led to his rival, the Maronis, basically going down on RICO charges, right? Getting caught up in this drug bust, the biggest drug bust Gotham has ever had. And Carmine Falcone essentially served it up to the GCPD on a platter, right? From there, the next big, huge reveal is Riddler basically releasing this videotape of him speaking over different photos and pictures of Thomas and Martha Wayne, basically letting you know that Thomas was not this Boy Scout, not this golden boy, right, of the city like everyone thought he was for years, right? He actually may have had something to do with getting a reporter who was looking into Thomas Wayne actually killed, right? And so what you come to find out is, Bruce goes and confronts Carmine. Carmine sort of in, a dirty trickster mobster nature, right? He basically bends the truth to Bruce, right? Where it did seem like Thomas did come to Carmine to essentially make this reporter stop. But Carmine sort of says it, and it's really weird. Like, this is mainly my main problem with this movie's narrative, right? It's sort of this reveal, because Carmine in this scene essentially says, like, he told me to put the fear of God in him, but when the fear of God didn't work, he basically insinuates that he shot him, and then he's like, your dad told me to take care of it, so I took care of it, and then from there it goes to this very, very short scene of Bruce unlocking like these padlock chains on his parents' bedroom, and you barely see in that room for like more than a second, and then immediately cuts to Alfred, who's recovering in a hospital bed, who was earlier attacked in the movie. It's really not that important, but he was attacked earlier in the movie, and now Bruce is confronting him immediately when he wakes up about it. And basically Alfred tells him, like, no, your father just was a good person. He made a mistake, in that he thinks it was actually Falcone who had his parents killed. And the reason why I have a problem with this reveal, and it's really my only complaint about this movie, right? It is sort of led up to be the big twist in the movie, right? That, Thomas Wayne might have been dirty. But like, for me, once again, as a person who knows Batman history and his canon sort of like the back of my hand, like, that is something that you saw coming a mile away, which is cool. That's fine. My biggest problem is that they try to do the morally gray thing here, where I feel like it would have landed a lot better if you just stuck with, yes, either Thomas was corrupt or he was like sort of this golden angel, right? Because I feel like if you lean into the corrupt aspect, you can make this movie very much like Telltale Batman, where Bruce really has to find his own reason to continue being Batman, right? Instead of just using his parents' death as sort of the fuel for it. Or you just lean into, they were innocent people who got gunned down. And, that's just a part of the city, right? Which also fuels into, Bruce's mission. But like, when you do this morally gray thing, I don't know, it sets up like this really weird tone, and especially the way it was revealed, where it was almost immediately refuted. I don't know. I just feel like either they could have written that a lot better to have the impact that I think they wanted it to have, or like they're missing some scenes here, because it does feel like that scene where Bruce goes into his parents' room is supposed to be a lot longer than it actually is. And it feels like maybe there's supposed to be a flashback scene. But, I digress. I think for the most part, like, if that is my only real complaint, I think that this movie's main story, like I said, is focused around Bruce. And the reason that you're here is basically to see Bruce be Bruce and watch Robert Pattinson act his ass off, right? Whereas, like, the rest of the narrative, like the Riddler stuff, like I said, it's pretty familiar for most Batman fans, but it's good. It's high quality, like, familiarity, right? But the thing I really love that sort of harkens back to, like, core Batman debates that you would have with, like, your other super hardcore Batman friends, which is sort of like the third kind of twist in my head, right? My interpretation of this movie is sort of why Riddler sort of was inspired. And because, like, in the comics, Edward Nygma is very much like an egocentric maniac. Everything is about him. He thinks that he is smarter than Bruce. He never thinks that Bruce is on the same level, that like the thought of them being equals is like laughable, right? He's very much like this asshole archetype, right? He's a prick. In this, though, like, he is so different. He is so deranged. He is so unhinged, right? Like, he is like almost like they wrote him like an incel in some instances, like this completely demonic type of character. And I really love the interrogation scene, because the interrogation scene is where you really start to see a bit more of the classic Edward Nygma with sort of the way that he's talking with Batman. And I really love in that instance that he sort of reveals, he's like, no, you don't understand. Like, we did this together. And Batman's like, no, we didn't. Like, we had nothing. He's like, no, like, I left you the notes. I left you everything. And, like, you did it perfectly, right? And he's like, and Bruce is like, oh, my God, like, I kind of did do that. And I kind of played right into his hands. And Riddler sort of, in his head, sees Batman as, like, his role model or his hero to the ascension of becoming the Riddler, right? Where instead of like how it normally is, where like Riddler will just, you know, like in the comics or whatever, do, you know, become this criminal on his own accord, he saw inspiration from what Batman was doing because Batman represented vengeance. And in his eyes, you know, Riddler wanted vengeance for what he was done. So to him, they're on the same page. And when Bruce rejects him in that scene, you know, Paul Dano goes completely bonkers and completely off the wall. And you can tell, like, this was supposed to be a big moment for him, you know, seeing Batman, the guy who got him to do what he got to do, and him reject him. And he just completely can't handle it. And it's a really great, amazing scene. Both Robert Pattinson and Paul Dano are acting their asses off in that scene. Some people think it's like maybe a little bit overkill when he starts singing the opera song. I thought it was very comic booky. I actually really like that. Yeah, I can't get enough of sort of the dynamic that they have in this movie. Speaking of the dynamic, let's kind of just briefly talk about the performances in this movie, because I think that this is some top tier acting going on. Let's start with Zoe Kravitz. I think that she is a good, comparable Catwoman. I think she does kind of get outshined in this role, because I do think she is maybe not the greatest of actors in comparison to people like Robert Pattinson, Jeffrey Wright, Paul Dano. But she's a very good Catwoman. Like, she is essentially, in my eyes now, Selena Kyle. You know, she has the sex appeal, she has the walk, she has the look. And I'm sure, you know, she'll eventually find her acting chops, but like some of her line delivery is a bit rough compared to the others. Jeffrey Wright, Jim Gordon, absolutely amazing. He brings a different sort of chemistry to his relationship with Batman, where it feels a lot more personal than other interpretations. Andy Serkis as Alfred Pennyworth, I think, is good. There's just not enough of him in this movie. He's barely in this movie for more than like 3 or 4 scenes, and I would have liked to see a lot more. Obviously, that's probably going to play a bigger role in future movies, but it is a little bit weird given sort of their contentious relationship in this film, that they don't necessarily have a longer breakthrough moment than sort of the hospital scene, but, you know, he's very good in the role. Colin Farrell as the Penguin is easily the star who steals the show for a lot of people. You know, obviously, besides, you know, the prosthetic makeups that they have Colin in, he really was made for this role. Like, his like Italian gangster Penguin is so good. You know, he and there's like all these little character details, right? Like, there's this giant scar on his face. He's got gold teeth. He has a limp. You know, they call him a gimp at a certain point in the film. That's why, you know, a penguin, because he waddles. You know, apparently he has like this very violent reputation. Like, it's really good. You know, he runs the Iceberg Lounge, and within the Iceberg Lounge, there's this club called the 44 Below. Like, it's really great. I really loved him. The car chase scene is top tier. That's might be the best like action sequence in the entire film. It's phenomenal. That Batmobile is a beast. Like I've sort of talked about with the Riddler, Paul Dano, fantastic. Really eats a lot of the scenery when he's in certain scenes. He's very deranged, very unhinged in sort of like this modern way where he's like using social media as like sort of like a weapon, and it's really cool. Let's talk about the man himself. Arguably the best performance in this entire movie, and I think the best Batman performance, period, and that is Robert Pattinson. And this man with this piece of plastic on his face is acting his fucking ass off. And the way that he is able to sort of embody and encompass Batman, like he just understands Batman in a way that not a lot of the other actors did. I would say the closest person who understood it as well was Affleck. And it's weird because it's almost like they are kind of like similar, or like this is like the younger version of Affleck in some sense, because like the little mannerisms, the stares, like he just looks so intimidating. He is such a presence when he walks onto the scene, and a lot of that is because of obviously the performance that Robert really throws himself into, and it's amazing, right? And you know, his voice, you know, you could say it's similar to Bale. I think it is much more similar to how Kevin Conroy is in the original animated series, where it is very subtle, it is very subdued, it is not necessarily over the top like Christian Bale's, but he is great. Fantastic. And I know some people are going to have a problem with his Bruce Wayne. I don't really know what to tell you there. I mean, this is year 2. He's not necessarily looking to build his Bruce Wayne persona yet. You know, wait for other films. That's basically what I'd say. You know, he is broody, he is emo, and I love it. I love it when he takes the mask off and there's the dumb fucking eye makeup, because that's fucking great. It's amazing. And just like a quick side note to, like, you know, we just talked about the performances, but like I want to talk a little bit more about like the writing and world building that is happening here, because Matt Reeves has done something that not a lot of the other live actor Batman directors have ever really been able to do, aside from really Snyder, which was, in my opinion, embrace the absurdity of the character, right? Whereas like I feel like the Nolan movies really put aside a lot of the core pillars and DNA of Batman's, you know, makeup. Whereas here, Reeves really wants to embrace it. He really wants to bring it in close, kind of keeping it a little bit at a distance, right? You know, Reeves has been on the press run talking about like, well, you know, this is a very grounded Batman movie, but I think people are taking the wrong thing from that. I think that they're thinking that this is going to be super ultra realistic, where I am on the completely other side of this, and why I think it is much more animated series than it is going to be Nolan, because right from the get-go, Bruce Wayne, there is this noir edge, right? This sort of like cartoony edge, right? And it's from the very opening scene of him narrating his journal entries, which is straight out of the comics. And like the way that he's talking, and you know, like they think I'm in the shadows waiting to strike, but I am the shadows, you know, like that's quintessential. Like, you know, like you can almost hear like Kevin Conroy say that line. And along with, I think there is enough suspension of belief in the things Bruce are doing to where Matt Reeves can gradually increase the absurdity, increase the fantasticalness, increase the sci-fi elements, right? Because there are some like unrealistic things happening in this movie, right? And the movie kind of wants you to always know that, and it really wants to like kind of beat you over the head with that, where it's like, yeah, here's Bruce Wayne entering this train track and easily taking down this group of 10 people, right? He's getting shot all the time and the armor is hella bulletproof, right? He goes into the third act of this movie where there's 20 armed men with rifles and can take him out like it's nothing. He's beating the shit out of everyone, right? The Batmobile legitimately has a jet engine on the back of it, right? He's diving off of buildings and getting, you know, hitting the side of buses and bridges and walking away like he's fine, right? And it's very much, to me, like it harkens back to those early year Batman stories, you know, really before it kicks open the door to Gotham getting weird, where it's like, yeah, he's getting his ass beat a little bit here, right? Very much like year one, where he's on the balcony and he's, trying to take down these cat burglars, and, one almost falls off of the railing, right? It's just, it's so perfect. It's so beautiful. And it just has that soul. It just feels like animation almost come to life, right? It's so otherworldly. It's so bizarre. It's so not familiar in a lot of sense. It just feels like this is not our reality. And with that said, man, I'm done. I'm over. I'm tired. I've had to replace a ton of footage. I've had to replace a lot of audio. I apologize. I feel like this video was a lot better originally, but with a lot of the copyright strikes I did get, when I privately uploaded this, I basically had to change like everything. So, apologies, but The Batman, man, had a blast. I'm probably about to go see it a third time later within the week, probably this weekend or something. And I can't wait. It kind of is the movie of my dreams. And, without a further ado, like, comment, subscribe down below. Let me know what your thoughts are, where you think this possible trilogy might lead to, what you thought of Robert Pattinson, the action, the script, so on and so forth. Okay? And until next time, stay fucking groovy.